Long ago, there was an empire called Rome, or SPQR, that ruled over most of the explored world. And everywhere they explored, they managed to make people angry, including when they encountered Carthage. But before I get into that story, let me tell you my thesis.
Conquest of Rome led to great discovery and made them the power we see them as today, but that all could have changed due to their encounters with Carthage and Carthage's smartest general Hannibal, who started the Second Punic War. The exploration of Rome was solely based on its military expertise, so when it came across Carthage, the greatest power in North Africa, they expected it to be quick and easy, as all the other wars were, but it was not. During the Second War between the two great powers, a Carthaginian general, with his heart set on Rome, encountered the Romans, greatest generals of the time. His smarts were too much for these generals, as he quickly powered through them, using one of the greatest battle tactics ever, the double classic envelopment. After exchanging many battle strategies, he was finally defeated by a Roman general named Scipio, and his revolutionary battle strategies would be a tool for the Romans for many years to come.
Now back to Carthage. Carthage was an empire that thrived purely off trade, so when encountering Rome, a war of money versus power was created. This leads to the First Punic War. The First Punic War was a sea battle, and that's what Rome had so much trouble with, as their army was based purely off troop size. Rome's strategy was to put a bridge on their ship, which would collapse over onto the enemy ship, and then they could take it over through cohorts that they would put on their ships. This strategy was incredibly effective and gave Rome an upper hand in the war. If it were not for this, the Punic War would have turned out incredibly different, and Rome may not have won the war, and the world as we know it today would probably turn out a lot different. Now we get to the man of the hour, Hannibal, the cause of the Second Punic War. But before I get into that story, let's talk a little bit about Hannibal's life leading up to this moment. Hannibal was born into a family that despised Rome. He spent his childhood learning everything he could about Rome through his father. His father had always been exchanging new ways with his son on how to destroy Rome. At age 26, he was given his own army and set out to destroy Rome. This was incredibly courageous because Hannibal was almost single-handedly taking on Rome. That was okay because if anyone could do it, it was Hannibal. Some people speculate that Hannibal had bad encounters with his brother-in-law that led to his assassination. Overall, the move was pretty necessary to turn him into a general and allowed for him to become the person we know him as today. Hannibal then took Court Hadash as his home base and set out to encounter and crush Saguntum, a small Roman settlement, to start the Second Punic War. It takes a smart man to battle an empire, and Hannibal was that smart man, as his IQ was probably about 150 at the time. All his life, Hannibal had been training for this moment, and no matter what people said about him, nothing would stop him. A true leader can look fear right in the eye, spit in its face, and then call the men behind them to blindly join you. Hannibal was this man, and that was exactly what he did. Hannibal exploring into uncharted territories of Rome and using battle strategies unfamiliar to everyone is a clear sign of genius and courage. By using an unknown idea, it could be seen as suicidal, as it could lead to almost death. Let alone, if you fail, you exchanged your great idea with people that could end you and everyone you love. Creativity is what strived Hannibal to attack Rome, mixed with curiosity to see what would happen. Now let's talk about the other end of the story and what Rome was doing at the time and how they felt. In between 230 and 220 BC, Rome had signed a treaty with Carthage, defended Rome from the Gauls, and right after Hannibal takes Saguntum, the Second Irian War ends with the conquest of Iria by the Romans. So this has been a pretty good period of time for the Romans in their conquest. The Romans declare war with Carthage, starting the Second Punic War. They didn't fear that this war would be any more difficult than the first war, as the first war didn't go as poorly as it could have. One of Rome's weaknesses was its overconfidence in war, which was one of the reasons Hannibal nearly crushed Rome in the first place. Rome was like an overconfident sports team at the time, because they had just won so many wars, and victory had never been too hard for them because of their pure military power at the time.
So you can imagine that starting to lose was overly scary for Rome, as they thought that it could have been the end to them, even though they kind of over-exaggerated. The only problem with the war was that most of Rome's troops were at its borders, and far away from Rome at the time. That led Hannibal to have a straight path straight into Rome, and he didn't really have to work too hard to get there.
Rome's army was very large at the time, so it was incredibly difficult to get their army in one space at one time, and the generals weren't the most courageous people of the time or the smartest people. They were just people that knew how to throw troops into a battle and encourage them slightly. Thus, heading into the battle, Hannibal had an incredible advantage over the Romans because of his brain, which led him to really put his heart and effort into this war. The biggest reason Hannibal made such a good general was because of his brain, but it was because his dad had only put two things into his brain his entire life: how to win and all about war. That's all his life was up to that point, was winning and war. Carthage's view of war was not like a sports game. It was more like a life or death situation. You see, they weren't very happy people. They were angry at the time because they just lost a war. So, say it's a close game and you lose, it's not, oh well, there's still another game. You're dead. This gave Hannibal an extreme advantage, knowing this was his only opportunity and there's no tomorrow, only if he lived to survive today. So this is not like the Super Bowl where there's next year. This is your last opportunity to destroy Rome. Now let's talk about the encounters in between Hannibal and Rome. You see, Hannibal wasn't some dumb general like some of the others where he just threw his troops into the battle, not even really caring about what happened to them, because no matter how many troops you threw at Rome, they always seemed to have even more than you did, and SBQR would win every single time, because for every one troops that Carthage has, there's about 2 Romans, which made it extra difficult to try and defeat them. The reason for this was Carthage paid for all their troops and hired mercenaries, as Romans hired their citizens and or slaves if they wanted to become free. They had to either join the military or do some other task that was way too difficult for them to do. Now Hannibal had to think outside the box on how to defeat Rome. He couldn't just beat them out of military power, because that wouldn't work. So he had to try something completely new and different, something that had never been done before by any of the generals, and if you failed, you would probably die. So he came up with the double classic envelopment, an idea of which his troops would swoop around the enemy troops and crunch in the troops and then just pancake them from all around. Now it was time to take Rome with his new strategy. So Hannibal marched his troops all the way from Spain, where he was at before, to Rome to try and defeat them and take Rome. But there's only one obstacle in the way, and that was the Alps. Because Rome is in Italy, Hannibal had to make the decision on whether to cross the Alps or go around them. For the element of surprise, he decided to go over the Alps. This led to a loss of almost all of his elephants and almost half of his foot soldiers from frostbite and falling over the edge. Sources say Hannibal lost about 3,000 troops and most of his elephants. This didn't bother Hannibal though, as he still had a fair chance of taking Rome with what he had left. So he was in Rome, he's ransacking, and he's trying to destroy Rome, and nothing can really stand in his way, until Rome decides they're fed up with this, and they decide to bring all their troops over back to Carthage and where he is. So now Carthage is getting ransacked by Romans, and Hannibal has to kind of do the walk of shame and travel all the way back to Carthage, to where he finds Scipio waiting for him, the Roman general, and defeats Hannibal, flees from the battle. Then he dies, then they salt Carthage, and all the plants die because it's salted. Carthage dies out, and Rome conquers that area of the world. Thus, Rome explored the world, encountered Carthage and many other enemies, and exchanged new battle strategies. They exchanged the greatest attack strategy ever. They exchanged wisdom, land, and knowledge from Hannibal and what he did. My name is Carson Miller, and that was Hannibal versus Rome, the Second Punic War.